and we're preparing for the Yamim Noraim. And this year, I think that the liturgy of the Machzor speaks louder to us with greater relevance than at any other time, at least in my lifetime. When you look at prayers in the Machzor, they just jump out at you. And of course, most notably is the Utana Tokef. I think all of us are going to be moved to our very core when we hear those words, mi yechia mi amut. And at the end, though, there are those three words to sustain us: tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, repentance, prayer, and acts of charity, tzedakah. And I was thinking about that as we were preparing for this evening, because in a very real way, those are the building blocks in any society. And if you look at the list of calamities in the Utana Tokef, almost all of them are things beyond our control. And so what you do in the face of chaos is to create order, and the building blocks of order in our tradition are tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. And what I want to suggest to you tonight is that as we begin the month of Elul, we're going to be focusing on these ideas. And tonight, we have a chance to focus on tzedakah. And this idea of making a difference for others and the obligation to make a difference for others is as old as the Torah itself. Come Yom Kippur, when we read the words of Isaiah, we'll be asked, is this the fast I've chosen? And he will remind us, as he does every year, that the real fast of Yom Kippur is to clothe the naked and feed the hungry. And we want to introduce this congregation to Jewish heroes and heroic organizations. And Leket Yisrael is a heroic organization, but our speaker this evening, Joseph Gitler, is a true Jewish hero. I mean that sincerely. I've spent many years involved with Mazon, and I've watched Leket Yisrael, and I've long wanted to bring its work to our congregation. So tonight is a special night for us. So let me tell you a little about Joseph, and I'm going to let him offer his remarks. And like always, you can respond in the chat, and we can hopefully create a conversation. In 2003, 3 years after making Aliyah, Joseph Gitler founded Table to Table, Israel's food rescue network, as a one-man volunteer operation to respond to the paradox of growing hunger and poverty in Israel on the one hand, and significant food waste on the other hand. Now known as Leket Yisrael, the National Food Bank, with affiliates in the United States, Canada, the UK, and France, Leket has grown to become the largest food rescue and food resource organization in Israel, with nearly 100 employees, 12 delivery vehicles, and tens of thousands of volunteers. Today, Leket Yisrael rescues and redistributes annually 1.5 million hot meals, over 1 million sandwiches to underprivileged school children, and 24 million pounds of produce and dairy products to 180 nonprofit organizations throughout Israel, reaching 140,000 needy Israelis weekly. 140,000 needy Israelis weekly. So there are challenges that we can't control, and pandemics do come, but there are issues that we can control, we can address, and Leket Yisrael is one of those ways of addressing them. Joseph was honored to receive the Presidential Award for Volunteerism from former President Perez, and was selected to deliver the 2015 Eli Talk. He's a recipient of the inaugural 2014 Bonet Prize, and named one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world. Gitler is a New York native, married to Leela, and the father of 5 children. He's got a law degree from Fordham University, a BA from Yeshiva University, and prior to making Aliyah, he worked as an attorney in the New York City area and also spent 3 years in software sales and business development after arriving in Israel in 2000. It's our pleasure to hear from Joseph Gitler.
Thank you, Rabbi, for that lovely introduction. Very, very appreciative of the time, of all of you who are on, hopefully in a beautiful evening in Chicago. I know it's unsaid on these calls these days in Zoom. Hopefully I won't be disturbed by too many children, whether mine or someone else's, but that's always a risk these days. I'm in a house with other people's children as well besides mine. But luckily mine is plugged into Fortnite, for those who are familiar with the Fortnite game, so he's not gonna bother me unless I bother him. It's a very easy equation these days. I just wanna take note as well that on the call tonight at 3 in the morning in Israel is Dina Fiedler, who is she's waving now to all of you, who is an integral part of the Leket team, who has been working hand in hand with me for, I don't know, a decade at least, maybe longer already, Dina. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but a long time. We're also friends, and we've known each other for longer than that. And she got up, mostly I think to make sure I don't say anything I'm gonna regret, but also because part of what Dina does is focus her energies on and relationships in the Chicago area. So she's been traveling until March, when who knows what the future will be, but she's been traveling a couple of times a year to Chicago. So it was important for us that she be on this call as well. And so in case any of you have heard from her before by email, now you can put a face to the name. So thank you, Dina, for getting up at 3 in the morning. Really, I'm not sure I would have done the same, so thank you. And I didn't ask her to get up, and I didn't tell her to get up. She did it by her own choice. Doesn't work that way in Leket, I promise. I got no say. So, just not many gaps for me to fill in personally from what the rabbi said. The only thing I'll add is that my wife, Leela, is Canadian. So she made the smart decision not to continue from Toronto with me to New York. She spent a couple of extra days in Canada and went straight back to Israel. So she didn't have to quarantine because Canada is a green country. So if you see her gallivanting around Israel, that's because she's following the rules. She's allowed to be doing that. Unlike me, when I get home next Monday, I've got 2 weeks in quarantine, followed by a somewhat quarantined Rosh Hashanah, I imagine, as well. So hopefully our team will arrange a lot of these kind of Zoom calls, because I'm going to have a lot of hours in the day to fill. So really a bit of background, and I want to put it out to all of you. I know you are polite. I'm sure not all of you are Midwesterners originally. I'm sure there's some New Yorkers on this call, but certainly at any time, whether by chat or by unmuting your mic, if you have a question you want to ask, just do it. Okay, just say, excuse me. You don't even have to say, excuse me. You don't have to raise your hand. Just butt right in there and ask whatever you want. It's much more enjoyable for me to have that kind of give and take instead of just droning on, which, as Dina knows, I'm quite capable of doing. So let me just fill in just a bit about myself. I am a native New Yorker. I'm not an Israeli with a really good American accent. I've been in Israel for 20 years. Proud to be an Israeli, but still definitely an outsider, which I think I'll always be. But that has certain advantages. And certainly when my wife says, can't you work on your Israeli accent? I tell her no, because I think it's very important that native Israelis know who I am, who Dina is, who's in a similar situation like me, where we came from, that we came by choice, that we didn't have to run away to come to Israel as a refuge, but we came there because we were educated that way and we wanted to make our lives there. So, so my accent in Hebrew is still pretty bad. That's the point of that. So 20 years in Israel, in Ra'anana, which is about 20 minutes northeast of Tel Aviv. As I told the rabbi right before we started, I lived there primarily because my wife's brother moved there 23 years ago, and my in-laws were quite clear that they didn't want to have to visit multiple places in Israel and that we had no choice. So we ended up in Ra'anana, but we're very happy with our decision. It's really a wonderful community, like a lot of like-minded people. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's an easy thing in that sense. And lots of English speakers, which is not great for our children's Hebrew, but certainly a very easy place to come and settle down in when you move from the United States. In 2003, if you remember your history a little bit, so 2003 was really the height of the Second Intifada in Israel. It was, really the height of the economic crisis in Israel. It's going to sound like what we're going through today. No tourism, except for the evangelical Christians who continue to come. Now even they can't come, unfortunately. And coupled that together with, post-September 11th, when investment in Israeli high tech really dried up, the same way it dried up in the US, the Americans being the biggest investors in Israel, that dried up as well. Taking that together with the incredible success of the economy in Israel. I mean, I've been in Israel for 20 years. I've been visiting since I was 8. The change in the 30 plus years that I've been coming to Israel is astronomical. But if there are people on the call who were in Israel 40 years ago, 50 years ago, more than that, for them it's whatever, even greater than astronomical. It's a miracle, and it's a miracle we hoped for and we prayed for, that Israel should be able to build a strong economy. The problem with that, it's no different in the United States, is that so many people get left behind. Because they're in low-paying jobs that don't keep up, especially as countries become wealthier, the cost of living expands dramatically. And so you have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Israelis who, let's say over the last quarter century, their incomes have just not kept up with the cost of living in Israel, especially housing, which is also a massive issue in the United States. People on very low salaries, even in cheap housing, they just can't make a go of it. And so all these different things sort of melted into a chillant for me. And, I said to myself, we have so many people in need, so many people who are working and can't make ends meet, which of course I found naively disturbing, which I still find very disturbing, but I understand that unfortunately that seems to be the way of the West, that we live in the richest, most powerful countries in the world, and yet we're surrounded by people who work hard and cannot feed their families with dignity, which I know we're all disturbed by that. I'm not saying there's easy solutions for it, but it certainly should disturb all of us. And all that came together for me, and I said, there's got to be something I can do to help. And what I discovered, surprisingly, is that in Israel, while we were filled with wonderful charities taking care of the poor, soup kitchens and homeless shelters and battered women's shelters and after-school clubs for kids, and food pantries, you name it, wonderful people doing whatever they can to help the poor, we didn't have a food bank. We didn't have the Chicago Food Depository, okay, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is, one of the world's leading feeding charities. We had every piece of the puzzle except for the organization that would sit on top and just think about how to get food to the agencies who need it. And I learned this not because I'm smart. I learned it because I went and I visited charities throughout Israel, and all of them said to me, we know there's so much excess food, but we don't get it. And so I said to myself, I remember from living in New York, an organization called City Harvest. I remember the New York Food Bank. I remember so many different organizations taking care of the poor. How could it be in the land of milk, honey, and charities, where there's so many charities in Israel? I have no doubt, I'm sure I'm not the first Israeli charity on a call like this to your synagogue. How could it be like in America, a food bank is such a basic part of every major city and minor city in the United States for decades, decades and decades. And here you were in a very, very significant third sector, as we like to call it in Israel, the charity sector. And this piece of the puzzle seemed to be missing. And so for me, that was the jumping off point. And said to myself, well, let me see where I can get food. And obviously, the best way to start is to start off with the low-hanging fruits. And the low-hanging fruit in Israel was event halls, caterers. And that was really, again, back to the Hebrew, my Hebrew was, I went to Jewish day schools, but I don't have to tell any of you who also went through the Jewish day school system, we're not great in the United States at teaching Hebrew, unfortunately, unlike the Europeans and the Canadians. So my Hebrew is pretty subpar. It's much better today, but pretty subpar. I remember writing down the words I needed and just started to call up caterers and event halls. And I'll really try to end with the history in another minute. And I said to them, I know you have leftover food. I know you throw it away. Would you give it to me? And really, I was just some guy. I wasn't coming with any charity backing me up. I wasn't coming and saying I'm part of the joint. I'm part of the Jewish agency. I'm part of some big charity. It was just a guy with a bad accent, which, by the way, I think that helped in that case because it let people just keep their guard down. I said, would you give me your food? And the response wasn't, what kind of legal risk am I at if the food should spoil? What kind of tax deduction can I get? The reaction was, how can we help? Okay, it was incredible because I had all the wrong thoughts about Israelis and volunteering and giving and who they are and what they are. And all they did was say, we're in, how can we help? And that was it. I started going out at night in my car, picking up leftovers from events and bringing it to charities in my area, Herzliya, Kfar Saba, Tel Aviv, and distributing it. And the quality of the food and the quantity of the food and the joy of the waiters and the caterers, and really everyone loves, this is not a hard sell. This is so basic. I mean, it's straight out of our Torah, Bal Tashrit, not to waste. Not that any of us really follow it, unfortunately, but it's so basic to Jewish practice that we should not waste food. We shouldn't waste anything, but certainly I think food, because it's the most basic need, is something we've all talked about, we all thought about. I'm very fortunate that I was able to get this organization off the ground. So that's really how we got started off. And, went from event halls to army bases, to hotels, to corporate cafeterias, to restaurants, you name it. Distribution almost exclusively through agencies. We don't generally distribute directly to the poor. Leket Israel is not a religious organization. We work with everyone in Israeli society with pride, Arab, Druze, Bedouin, Circassian, Jewish, and of course, African refugees who are a very difficult population with a lot of needs because of a lot of different policies, primarily in South Tel Aviv. We're very, very proud of working across the board, as you would expect from an organization that calls itself the National Food Bank, right? It would not be acceptable if it were any other way. And so that's really how we got started. And that built up over time and over the years. And it went from me and volunteers, and Dina was one of our first volunteers. And then it went to a little truck and a bigger truck and more people and more volunteers. And then a couple of years in, we realized that there was a whole nother part of waste that we were totally neglecting, and that was farming. And it turns out that the scale, the magnitude of what gets wasted in the entire chain of agriculture is beyond staggering. I have no doubt many of you And we'll get to COVID in a couple of minutes, but I have no doubt many of you saw the stories in the States, in March and April when everything hit really hard, about all the farmers who were spilling out milk and eggs that weren't getting sold, and pigs that were being killed, not to be eaten, but to be buried because they had gotten too big. And the whole chain broke down in the United States. And so in Israel, for a whole variety of reasons, huge amounts of agriculture go to waste. We estimate about 20% of all agriculture that's grown in Israel goes to waste, which is many hundreds of thousands of tons a year. And actually, that's better than a lot of other countries, meaning it's massive, but we don't waste as much as some other places. And so we started to investigate, and what we discovered was a lot of farmers leave crops in the fields when market prices get low. Sometimes they don't even bother picking it all. Sometimes they've picked it and they've delivered it to a packing house, but it's funny looking, it's ugly. We've all been trained that every tomato looks the same, every banana looks the same, every carrot looks the same, so it doesn't even make it to the marketplace, right? They call that ugly fruits and vegetables. You have order cancellations, you have acts of God where crops are slightly damaged and they're not going to be sold. You have currency devaluations. You have, recently we had a story a couple of years ago where a farmer simply had potatoes from the year before. He just hadn't unloaded all those potatoes. He had 500 tons left and his new crop came in. And he gets more money for his new crop. So he just said, Leket, it's all yours. And so we have generally about 1,000 volunteers a week helping us pick in the fields or volunteer in our warehouse, repackaging fruits and vegetables. And we have our own team of paid pickers who we send around the country. And we have outsourced day pickers when we need extra help. It's a massive, massive undertaking, which because of COVID is about to grow. So that's really what Leket is in normal times. A very efficient, hardworking food rescue organization, which utilizes a staff of over 100 people and tens of thousands of volunteers working in unison to make sure that perfectly edible, healthy, nutritious, safe food doesn't go to waste. That's who we were till March 1st, okay? Or maybe I'll say March 15th. And no different than Chicago, in the middle of March, the world fell apart. And it fell apart because of COVID, but also fell apart because, and I'm not questioning any government decisions, I can only imagine being in a position of power today and the impossibility of that kind of a job. And I'm kind of thankful I haven't gone into politics. I get asked sometimes, but my wife is very adamant that that's, it's her or politics, not both. So we'll see. For now, I'm with her, but we'll see. The state of Israel basically shut down our economy in the middle of March. And that really, the impact is massive. But for Leket, that led to a few very specific challenges. So the first challenge and the biggest challenge was that basically by March 20th, we went from an average of about 10,000 meals a day that we rescue to zero. Okay? Because the event halls were shut down, because the corporate cafeterias were shut down, because the hotels were shut down, and the army, even though the army wasn't shut down, they switched from buffets, which is what Leket cleans up. We need buffets to get food, to serving soldiers in single serving containers. So the minute that happened, there's basically nothing left for Leket. Now, as you can imagine, this at a time where even putting aside the normal people we serve, demand from one day to the next went through the roof. And so we didn't need 10,000 meals a day, we needed way more than that. Unemployment in Israel currently stands at 21%. It was 4% before COVID. And even if most of the economists are correct, no one sees anything less than 10% before year end. And I find that wishful thinking. But it is what it is, as painful as it is. And of course, the people who are getting the hardest hits are in the tourism sector, hospitality sector. One example, the city of Eilat, in the middle of April, unemployment hit 80%. Now it's down to 40%, maybe even a little bit lower because I've heard of a few more hotels that opened up this week, but it's still way more. Eilat had full employment before, and wage pressures, which was great, before COVID started. So we made a decision very, very quickly, and I'm proud of the decision we made. And the decision we made was, yes, Leket's core mission is food rescue, but right now we're in a war. Okay, we have a war. It's called COVID. It's not the wars we're used to in Israel. It's a different type of war. There's so many people in need. Leket has 17 years of goodwill. We have logistics. We have a staff that wants it. And we made a decision. We're going to launch a campaign, whatever it means for our future, whatever it means for, taking really nothing into account for the future, just, jumping into that foxhole and basically saying people need to be fed. The government's doing what it can. Other agencies are doing what we can, but we have a bully pulpit. We're respected. And we have goodwill, and we have a great team. We launched a campaign in the middle of March, and we said, Leket's buying food. We never buy food, we're buying food. And who are we buying it from? We're buying it at a reasonable bulk price, cooked meals from exactly the places that normally give us food for free. From caterers, from hotels, from restaurants, in order to try to keep them in business. Unfortunately, if I had known how long this was going to go on for, we probably would have flattened the amount of meals we purchased, so we would have had meals for longer. But I was also a big chacham, and I thought this thing was going to be over after 2 or 3 months, but I was way off on that. And so we launched this campaign, and I'll tell you a couple of things. It was incredibly successful. We raised millions of dollars over the span of 1 or 2 months. We spent all that money between March 5th, March 20th, and recently, all of it. All the money that came in for the special campaign was spent exclusively on buying meals and feeding the poor. We kept hundreds of people in caterers and hotels and restaurants working, keeping their jobs. I wish I could tell you they got rich off of Leket. No one got rich. People survived. That's not why we exist as an organization, but sometimes you have to pivot and make a left turn when it's unexpected. Millions and millions of meals, which I think we definitely made the right decision doing that. We continue to purchase meals at a much smaller clip, and we continue also to fundraise for that. And all the money that comes in, we're spending on these meals. Currently, the biggest campaign we have going for that is actually at restaurants around Israel, which have been whipsawed, probably no different than in Chicago, with changing regulations seemingly on a daily basis. And so now we're trying to support a whole bunch of restaurants throughout Israel who can provide, solid family-style meals to agencies that need it and where it can be delivered safely. We're back up to about 4,000 meals a day right now that we're getting from hotels and corporate cafeterias, but that's still a far cry from where we were beforehand. That's cooked food. I'm very proud of what we did. I wish we could do more. The other side is agriculture, which, as you can imagine, is exactly the opposite. All that farming that was supposed to be sold to hotels, to corporate cafeterias, etc., is making its way to Leket. Leket has reallocated resources. We also raised additional funds for that. And we have been picking every month hundreds and hundreds of more tons than we normally do. And we expect in a year, in 2020, our goal was around 15,000 tons, which is well over 30 million pounds. That was our initial goal for the year. Now we're looking at something closer to 20,000 tons, which again, I don't really know what that means, but it's a heck of a lot of fruits and vegetables. And it's actually the largest gleaning initiative anywhere in the world. If any single organization in any, not in any country, well, the gleaning operations in the US are of course much bigger than that, but by any one organization. And again, it's the classic reasons why Leket gets stuff, but now you add COVID to the mix, and it's just been an absolute explosion in the amount of stuff that's been made available to us. And we imagine that's going to continue at least for the next few months. I feel like I've said a lot, so I would love to just take some questions from all of you. Unmute your mic, introduce yourself. Maybe not everyone on the call knows you. Okay, Julian, I see you. You're the first to unmute. Julian Blumenthal.
I'm a friend of Kate Mayer, who's the head of the Greater Chicago Food Depository. She asked me to take notes, which I've been doing. Okay. So she knows that people from your organization have been in contact with the Greater Chicago Food Depository. So I'm really was interested in what you said, and I will pass it on. One thing I think people be interested in, when Israel is at a military war, how does your organization respond to that?
Okay, so hopefully we're done with that, although it certainly doesn't look that way. Now, we couldn't have picked a more unfriendly neighborhood to be in. Look, it's a great question, because I very much feel, and I said in the beginning, I very much feel that COVID is our new war. And that's really why the organization had to change what we're doing so quickly. We could have just said, this is not who we are. We're going to wait for things to pass. So actually, the beginning of COVID very much reminded me of the last war in 2014, which was the last time where we faced a situation where it was a little bit different. In 2014, primarily in the South as an example, the whole South, we really actually couldn't even pick up the food, even if it was available. It just felt too dangerous to do that. Many places also closed down. And so I remember 2014 was actually the last time that we purchased food, and we did it in many ways in a very similar reason. So if you remember, in 2014, the places that were hardest hit were Sderot and Be'er Sheva. And I remember we also were able to raise funds to change our direction a little bit. And what we said at the time was, we're going to buy, we found all the local supermarkets in Sderot, and we said, we're opening up accounts with you. And then we told the local charities, you can send your people to these family-run supermarkets in order to get food, because Leket can't deliver food. I remember another example in Be'er Sheva. 2014 was a World Cup, if you remember. In Be'er Sheva, in the summer of 2014, the most beautiful sports bar opened up just in time for the World Cup. Of course, bad timing. And so I remember one of the places that we went to them and we said, we want to buy meals from you, okay? Because we just want to help you get through this time. And so the previous wars that we've been through are very similar to what we're doing now, which means making that decision that you have logistics in place, that you have volunteers who want to help, that you have donors who want to help. And so you're able at that point to make that decision to do things a little bit differently. Other questions? I see there's some questions in the chat, so maybe I'll just catch that one first. This is from Diana Tessler, and Diana says, what is the turnaround time of holding the picked vegetables? Do you have refrigerated facilities? So yes, Leket actually recently moved into a massive, how big it is, 30, 40,000, 50,000 square feet, a very, very large refrigerated facility. I wish we could tell you that we own it, but we rent it. It's got huge amounts of refrigeration space, and So we have no issues with refrigeration. Interestingly, our last warehouse, when we rented it, we originally only rented half, and very quickly it was a mistake and it was too small for us, and then we had to rent the whole thing. This, when we rented it, we said, this is way bigger than we need currently. But because of COVID, volunteering restrictions and changes, interestingly, we've really had to spread out in a warehouse that's a little bit too big for us. And because because we're getting so much more fruits and vegetables, it's actually, we're using a lot more of this facility than we expected, than we started. The turnaround time is very quick. In cooked food, it can be the same day or maybe refrigerated and delivered the next day. We're not a warehouse, we're a distribution center. And when it comes to fruits and vegetables, things that have a very short shelf life are distributed very quickly. And other vegetables, all depends on the stage that they're in. We really love getting things like potatoes and carrots, which have a long shelf life, because then we can really spread it out. Because in Leket, we're always, we hate getting calls from a nonprofit saying, our people are turning orange because you've given us, so many oranges. We're trying to avoid that. We want to space things out, give them stuff at the pace that they can use it. And we also really, really want a lot of variety. Okay, Lori Chayton had a question. Do you get government support? How much of your support comes within Israel and how much for people in other countries? And then I'm also going to talk about the recipients a little bit. So, sorry, I'm just going to get comfortable here. Don't mind, I'm just going to take a sip of water. I don't know whose cup that is, but I'm not worried about COVID, as you can see. I'm just avoiding other human beings. So, so we do get government support, not enough. A few million shekels this year is what we expect to get. We have been working tirelessly over the last year or two, but especially now, the government has really seen the value of Leket, how we just took charge, partnering during the height of the crisis with dozens of municipalities and corporations, and working with the army to distribute food directly to thousands and thousands of people every day who couldn't leave their home, and how we were able to corral volunteers throughout the country in the most difficult times. And so we are getting a much closer look now from the government just in the last, and we can share it with the rabbi to share with the congregation, but just I wrote an article about this. Just in the last 6 weeks, we've had the president of the state of Israel who visited Leket for a very serious discussion about support and the needy. It wasn't just a photo op. The Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Welfare, and his CEOs and the teams, the bureaucrats and the professionals stand behind them. So I expect now, hopefully the government will last long enough for all this hard work to bear fruit. But our expectation is that we will achieve some much more significant government support in the near future. But I will tell you that will not stop what we do in fundraising. I want to have the fundraising and I want to have the government because I'm greedy and I want to grow Leket bigger, especially in times like this. So many charities are talking about going back in time, retrenching, cutting. When you're feeding the poor in times like this, you actually have to be pushing to try to get even bigger. And that is definitely the way our staff and our team is looking at things right now. To finish the question about, yeah.
Can I ask a question? Do you have in Chicago, for instance, actually, just a few blocks from the synagogue, we have one of the best food pantries in the city, Lakeview Pantry, which, sign of the times, is making distributions at Wrigley Field, or was making distributions on Wrigley Field on the weekends. Is there a system of food pantries in Israel? I mean, does that exist outside of the Haredi community?
Yeah, they do exist. Yeah, many of them are in the Haredi community, but I can tell you, over the last few months, I've seen food pantries all over the country doing, a lot of it is focused on Shabbat and the holidays in the Jewish community and in the Arab communities on their holidays. But it's very, very, very similar. Purchasing food or getting food from some government support or giving out food cards where the poor can go directly to the supermarkets. We didn't get to the point in Israel where they had to open up the sports. It didn't get as crazy like that in Israel, but certainly we have pictures and videos of gyms being taken over by charities and of municipalities setting up just in like this town square distributions during the Hanukkah. But yeah, it's a very advanced system of food distribution in Israel because unfortunately there has been a lot of need and there are a lot of players distributing food. Leket works very hard on really trying to find the leading organizations. We really try to to the poverty statistics. So if 20% of the Arab population is in poverty, really try to make sure that 15, 20, 25% of our food makes it to the Arab community. That's something that's very, very important to us. Unfortunately, I'll add that, of course, now we're seeing an explosion of need. And what's really painful is it reminds me of the early days of Leket. We're just seeing people who never in a million years thought they would need help. And that's where it gets really, really painful. We had recently Shira, who works with Dina and myself, went to visit one of our best partners in Tel Aviv. And a woman comes up and says, I heard there are people from Leket here. And she said, really crying, she said, I was a Leket donor, I was a Leket volunteer, and I fell so fast, so quickly, because so many people do when they don't save or when they have. And she said, I'm not even making this up. This happened. I wasn't there. She said, here I am now eating in a soup kitchen. And that just, I think for all of us who are, for Anglo-Israelis or Anglo-Jews, that's, an Ethiopian eating in a soup kitchen, a Russian immigrant eating in a soup kitchen. I'm not saying we accept that. That's painful. Okay, and all of you are on this call. I'm sure many of you have donated to those causes, have worked hard, bringing the Ethiopian Jews over, bringing the Russian Jews over here. And it's painful to see that not all of them have succeeded. But no one ever imagines like someone who moved from your shul in Chicago, moving to Israel, ending up eating in a soup kitchen. That's just unimaginable. So that's the kind of things we're starting to see. People with jobs like that who are just got hit so quickly and need help. And the government's doing. The government, there's unemployment through October. There's, just like in the US, the government has given out, money for free. And it's never enough. It isn't enough. And one thing Dina messaged me to remind me that we've even had high-tech people, right? People who are in high-tech, probably, not in the big companies, because the big companies are all doing well, but in the smaller companies who've, maybe that investment isn't coming through, maybe what they were trying to achieve isn't happening now. Look, I remember when I worked in high-tech, I was working in a job where we were selling software we were starting with Northeast publishers. I was having really good discussions on September 10th, 2001. Mm-hmm. On September 12th, done. I had no one to talk to, and that was completely over. And I think, unfortunately, we're reading about the Amazons and the Apples and the Teslas and the big guns, and I hope all of you are invested in those companies. But if you are, don't tell me. That's a fundraising trick. Don't raise your hand if you bought those guys recently. So I'm being nice because you're polite people from Chicago. And but yeah, there's a lot of high-tech pain now also, especially in companies that thought they were getting funding or have just started off. And that's a pillar of the Israeli economy and a pillar also, more importantly, of high-paying jobs. So when you go from a high-paying job, paying you in Israel a high salary, $10,000 a month, and now you're getting $2,000 a month from the government, if even that, you can't survive, right? You can't pay your mortgage, whatever other expenses you have. So that's one of the things that we're starting to see. I just want to finish one other piece, and then if there are any other questions. So one of the questions was about support. Lori asked this, support from within Israel and outside of Israel. And so I just want to mention that, so historically, probably we were getting somewhere around 35% in Israel, 30, 35, depends on the year. You know, sometimes we're higher than that till December 31. And then you've got the Americans and the Canadians who remember that it's the last day of the tax year. And then that just drops precipitously, but I'm not going to be upset at people's generosity. What's been interesting, and that's been getting better every year, more Israeli donors, and we see it. I see even the average size of our online donations from Israel, how it's really grown dramatically over the years. But I can tell you what's been most important is in COVID, Israelis have really understood that while certainly many people in diaspora still want to help Israel, there's tremendous local needs, and we respect that as well, and we understand that. And I can tell you during the times of COVID, certainly for the first few months, more than 50% of our donations came from Israel. Because Israelis understood this is a worldwide crisis. This is not just us in crisis. We're very used to crisis in Israel, okay? And now it's crisis worldwide. Jews still want to give to Israel, they still want to help, but they need to see that Israelis are doing their part. And it has been, I can tell you, I always say in Leket that the hardest job is to be our development director for Israel. That's the toughest job in the organization. Lots of no's, lots of small checks from people with big capacity. Maya, who runs that, all those years of, you know, planting the seeds and working, everything hit pay dirt during the last 4 or 5 months. She, you know, what she's been able to do with Israeli corporations and individuals has just been staggering to see. And for me, it's actually, it's amazing because the Eli talk that the rabbi mentioned that I gave a little over 5 years ago, the topic was all about, and I forgot the topic, but it was about Israeli philanthropy, getting better, not where it needs to be. And my thesis really remained the same, but over the last few months, it's really starting to change. And I'm really, really pleased to tell you that. I think that's a very important story for you to hear. And I hope other organizations in Israel are feeling that as well, but I can't give you much more data than that.
Joe, could you describe what people actually receive when they receive food from Leket? Like, what are they getting? Is it what you happen to have that day? I mean, how does that work?
Right. So I would say that is Leket's biggest challenge. Is as a food rescue organization, it's kind of hard to make promises. It's much easier to run a soup kitchen and have a budget and buy food and cook meals, but much better leverage to run a food rescue organization because for every dollar we spend, we bring in $4 or $5 worth of food. So but the flip side to that is until March 15th, after 17 years of experience, we have a pretty good sense of what we're gonna get. And the agencies have a pretty good sense of what we're gonna be able to provide to them. But all of them know that stuff happens. Trucks break down. An army base that we usually get 300 meals from had visitors and all the food is over. So all of them know they have to be prepared to have food in the freezer, to have budget to purchase. And so people we have not all the agencies we work with get cooked food. Pretty much all of them do get fruits and vegetables. Some cook it, some distribute it to people's homes. The cooked food is eaten generally in the agency. So we deliver cooked food mostly to after school clubs for kids and shelters and places where the food is just in high demand and can be eaten fresh, because we don't really want it to make a long journey to other agencies. I would just add, because Rabbi, the information, I just want to make this clear, not that it makes any difference because the numbers are so big, but some of the information that you had in the beginning was a bit outdated, and actually Leket works with 210 agencies currently, and those 210 agencies have over 200,000 clients. Now, I would not say that we take care of all their food needs, but we are very significant partners to all those agencies. Tens of millions of dollars worth of food a year flow through Leket to these agencies. And most importantly, we deliver all the food free of charge, okay? And the reason we do that, and that's not, most food banks charge a little bit to their partners. We made a decision many years ago that most of the agencies we serve, and you can, if you don't know this word, just tell me, most of the agencies are nebuch, okay? They're nebuch, they're mom and pop. They have very little money. They struggle to make ends meet. So either we can say to them, give us a penny a pound to help us, or we will try to raise the money. It's coming from the same sources. So we are very proud of the fact that we deliver all the food directly to the agencies free of charge, if they wish that. And the reason for that is they're the ones dealing with the horror. They're dealing with the homeless. They're dealing with the Holocaust survivors. They're dealing with the youth at risk. They're dealing with all the horrors that people's lives have. And so what we want to do is enable them to do their jobs, to educate, to rehabilitate, and not worry about how am I getting the fruits and vegetables, from Leket's warehouse in Ra'anana. Let them do their job and not think about any of that.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, you're on mute.
Lori, if you're asking a question, you got to unmute yourself. No? Okay. Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Joe, and Dina. I want to thank you for staying up so late at night or waking yourself up. Either way, quite a commitment. I want to say that this is really the beginning of our relationship with Leket, and that during the course of the holidays, we will be sharing the information with a larger congregation. But the work that you're doing is so inspirational and so important. And we wish, we pray for a day when COVID-19 will be a thing of the past and we can return to some sense of normalcy. But the lessons that we learned during this time are going to need to carry us forward also. But it is, when I began, I wasn't being hyperbolic when I spoke of you as a Jewish hero. And I want to just say, Yasher Koach, you are an inspiration to all of us. And we thank you, and Dina, and your entire organization for all that you do. And we hope to support you in the future. And I want to thank everybody else for coming out tonight. And we appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thank you for the kind words. And thank you everyone for staying on, especially those of you who I was able to see. I appreciate, it's not easy to keep concentration for so long. I'm really very appreciative of your time and your offer of support. And we will follow up, Rabbi, with you and send some more information to share with the congregation. And I hope, I really hope and pray that this will be over soon and that all of you will be able to join us in Israel, working together, sweating together in the fields. Don't worry, our warehouse is also hot. We can sweat there together and, everyone should have happy and healthy and safe holidays, and, listen to your doctor. I don't know who to, in America, I don't know who to say to listen to. Listen to your doctors. I don't know. To say to you, listen to your politicians, that sounds dangerous. So
No, I'm not sure about that one.
Listen to your doctors, do what they tell you, stay safe, and really just thank you for the time, and happy holidays to all. And
Shana Tova.
look forward to meeting you all in person very soon. Shana
Thank
Tova.
you again.
dear.
Shana Tova. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, good night, everybody.